So, chapter 31, like I said earlier, international competitiveness. When we talk about international competitiveness, we're simply talking about the ability of a country or firms to be able to compete in the global market. That is what international competitiveness is. So let's read further anyway.
Competitiveness.
Yeah. International competitiveness is the ability of a firm or a country to compete effectively in international markets. Many firms compete in global markets. It could be a small firm exporting furniture or a UK factory of a Japanese transactional exporting motor. So vehicle or a hotel in India serving customers from the United States. Many firms are affected by global markets. Much manufacturing in advanced economies has disappeared over the past 40 years because it could not compete with imports from countries with much cheaper labor. Equally, many advanced economies both export and import high tech products. So the competitiveness of individual firms and in the industries therefore changes over time. Competitiveness can be used in the context of national economies. For example, it could be argued that Chinese economy is more internationally competitive than the Indian economy. In this chapter, we will consider how competitiveness can be measured, what influences international competitiveness, what policies the government can use to improve competitiveness, and the significance of the international competitiveness. So there is international competitiveness if a country or a firm in a country is able to compete in the global market. So when we talk about firms competing in the global market, it involves importation and exportation. So what they are trying to let us know, understand here is that a lot of firms have disappeared over the years because they are unable to compete with other international competitive or other international competitors. And the last note here is about China, comparing China and India, where China is more internationally competitive than India. So we'll go to the measures of international competitiveness after now. Measures of competitiveness. There are several measures of international competitiveness, which include the following. So, for measures of international competitiveness or measures of competitiveness, we're talking about how we compare or how we are able to measure, how we are able to assess competitiveness between countries.
Yes.
So, the first thing is relative productivity rates. And when we talk about productivity, it's always output against a given level of input. So, we have capital productivity and we have labor productivity, but we're going to start with labor productivity.
Okay.
Yeah. So for labor productivity, here they wrote, labor productivity is output per hour worked. It is measured as real GDP per hour worked. Labor productivity measures how efficiently labor is combined with other factors of production in the production process. So we have the figure one there. The figure one shows how output per hour has changed between 1997 to 2016 for the G7 countries. Italy productivity has remained fairly flat over the period since its output per hour has remained broadly the same. Since 2007, the average productivity growth rate was lowest in Italy, followed by the UK. However, unlike Italy, the UK had relatively strong productivity growth in the period before 2007. Output per hour fell in most of G7 countries during the 2007 and 9 recession, and then increased sharply in the US and Canada. The country which experienced the sharpest rise in productivity over the whole period is the US. The digit per hour worked rose from 81.3 in an index to 109 in 27, from 97 to 109.1 in 2016. This is a rise in productivity of 34% over the period. This means its average productivity growth was 1.8%. So let's look at the index of the countries anyway. So, so the GDP index for G7 countries, we have Canada, France, Germany, Italy, Japan, UK, and USA. So according to the stars, let's see. Okay. The GP, okay. US is having better growth. Okay. So now, well, the point is about labor productivity. So based on what we have seen here, a country that has the highest labor rate or relative productivity simply means that labor in such country is, is better compared to other countries. So here they said a rise in an economy's relative labor productivity rate means its output per hour worked is growing faster than another economy. Or alternatively, it means its output per hour worked is falling more slowly than its competitor. So there are two ways we can look at the rise in labor productivity here when it comes to comparing with other countries. One, it could be that the labor productivity of that country is moving at a faster rate compared to other economies, or it's moving at a slower rate compared to how other economies are falling in terms of labor productivity. So other countries, their labor productivity is falling drastically. But in this economy, during recession, it's expected that labor productivity falls. But how much more it falls depends on each economy and maybe the measures they put in place. So that's why they said here that, or alternatively, it means its output per hour worked is falling more slowly than its competitors. So it's either you have a better labor productivity rate because it's increasing faster than those of your competitors, or your competitors' own are getting drastically slower compared to how slow yours is. So that's the way you can measure labor productivity. So every labor productivity could fall, but how much more it falls will determine which one is better. So a rise in relative productivity, all other things being equal, will improve a country's international competitiveness. So at the end of it all, if labor productivity is increasing, it gives firms in a country the competitive edge over their competitors. I think the point about labor productivity is clear there. So go to multi-factor productivity. Right back. Productivity. So we have multi-factor productivity. For multi-factor productivity, it combines both capital and labor productivity. So let's read further anyway. They say multi-factor productivity is also used to measure international competitiveness. These measures considers both labor and capital productivity. Multi-factor productivity reflects the overall efficiency with which labor and capital inputs are used together in the production process. So we are combining both labor and capital productivity to measure efficiency, which can be a measure of international competitiveness. So unit labor costs for an economy are measured in index number form, with 1 year chosen as a base year equal to 100 relative unit labor cost. Unit labor cost compared to other countries. For example, a rise in the US relative unit labor cost shows that labor costs per unit of output are rising faster in the US than other countries. Alternatively, US unit labor costs are falling less fast than in other countries. Hence, a rise in US relative unit labor cost shows that the US is becoming less competitive. A fall in US relative unit labor cost shows that US is becoming more competitive. So relative unit labor cost is a measure of labor cost compared to other competitors. So here they said a rise in US relative unit labor cost shows that labor costs per unit of output are rising faster. So if there's a rise in RULC of America, it simply means the output per labor is rising over those of its competitors. Or alternatively, if unit of labor costs are falling less than fast in other economies, it simply means the US labor relative unit is falling also, but other economies are falling more faster than those of the US. So a rise in US relative unit labor cost shows that US is becoming less competitive. So if there's a rise in the US relative unit labor cost, it means the cost of labor is increasing. And that would bring about less competitiveness because you have to pay more. Do you understand? So, and paying more means your cost of production is increasing, and you might have to pass that high cost on prices. So that simply means your exportation value, the value of your exportation would rise, and that might make you to be less internationally competitive. On the other hand, they said a fall in US relative unit labor cost shows that US is becoming more competitive. So if the US relative labor cost per unit is reducing, it simply means the cost of labor is falling. And if the cost of labor is falling, it means firms in the US might be able to pass on low cost on high prices for foreign customers. And that might make US to be internationally competitive. I think it's clear. So measuring labor cost or labor productivity is simply talking about how productive labor is and how the cost of labor is. So if labor productivity is increasing, a country or firms in that country is expected to be internationally competitive. And if on the other hand, if labor productivity is falling, the country is expected to be less internationally competitive. That is productivity. And the other one is about cost of labor. So if the labor cost is increasing, a country is likely to be less internationally competitive. On the other hand, if the labor cost is falling, the country is expected to be internationally competitive. That's how we measure competitiveness when it comes to relative productivity rates. I think it's clear. Good. Another way to measure international competitiveness is relative export prices. So we're talking about relative export prices. They said relative export prices are the export prices of the country's goods and services compared to the export prices of that country's main trading partners, expressed as an index. For example, a rise in relative export prices of the United States means that export prices of US goods are rising faster or falling less than those in the US main trading partners. Therefore, a rise in relative export prices shows that there has been a fall in the US international competitiveness. Similarly, a fall in relative export prices shows that there has been a rise in US international competitiveness. So relative export prices, we're simply talking about the price of exports of US compared to those of its trading partners. So if there is a rise in relative export prices in the US, it means that the price of US goods are rising faster than those of its competitors or falling less than those of the main trading partner. So at that point in time, the relative export price will show that US become less internationally competitive. So the point is, if a country is having a high price in terms of its relative export, it makes it to be less internationally competitive because it means the price it's selling to its foreign customers is greater than those of its or those of its trading partners. Do you understand relative export prices here? Good. So that's about relative export prices. Then we'll go to factors influencing competitiveness after now. And remember, when we talk about export, we're simply talking about selling to foreign customers, right? Good. Yes. So we're still on international competitiveness. So we're going to the factors influencing competitiveness. There are numbers of factors which affect international competitiveness, which include the following. One, productivity. So rises in an economy's productivity relative to its main trading partners will increase that country's competitiveness. For example, if a US export firm is able to produce 20% more goods with the same amount of labor, then labor productivity will have risen. This will reduce unit labor cost. This is likely to lead to the firms cutting its prices, making its goods more internationally price competitive if foreign firms have not achieved this rise in productivity. However, if foreign firms at the same time have increased their productivity by 30% with the same amount of labor, the US firm's relative productivity will have fallen, making it less competitive. So this assumes that all other factors such as wage costs remain the same. So because we are still comparing, we are still talking about relative productivity or relative competitiveness. So the first factor that could influence how competitive a country could be is productivity. And when we talk about productivity, we're simply talking about output against a certain level of input. So here they said a rise in a country's productivity in relative to its trading partners will increase the country competitiveness. So if your productivity is increasing compared to those of your trading partners, those of your competitors, it simply means it's giving you an edge over those of your competitors. That is the point there. Then, now that's the first point. Then they talk about the units of labor. So if productivity is increasing anyway, if you are still using the same number of labor to produce an increasing level of output, it simply means the labor cost is falling. And if the labor cost is falling, it simply means lower costs will be passed along on as lower prices. Considering that other factors that surrounds your productivity remains constant, like wages. I think you get the point I'm making here. So if labor productivity of a country is increasing compared in relative to other trading partners or competitors, it gives the country or the firms in that country a competitive advantage because foreign customers will be able to purchase at a lower price, and that attracts them to buy more. That is productivity. So an increase in productivity gives a country a competitive advantage over its trading partners. The second factor is quality of human capital. And when we talk about human capital, we're simply talking about the value of workers. So human capital is the value of the productive potential of an individual or group of workers. It is made up of the skills, the talents, education, and training of an individual or group of workers. An improvement in the quality of human capital should increase labor productivity and therefore reduce unit labor cost. This increases, let me talk about that before we go further to the next paragraph. Human capital is simply about the value you can put on the table as individual worker or as group of workers. And what improves the human capital? Skills, talents, education, and training improves human capital. So if human capital of a country or of an economy is increasing, it simply is improving. It simply means the quality of human capital is also going to increase the labor productivity. And if labor productivity is increasing, it reduces the labor unit cost. Because as soon as labor productivity increases, it simply means the output each labor is producing increases more than what it used to produce. And that makes it to be more efficient. So this increased price competitiveness of the firms. So firms that are able to, increase their productivity through labor because they have improved in human capital will give them a competitive advantage over their competitors. Do you understand it? So the second paragraph said, education and training will also affect non-price competitiveness. A well-educated workforce will have the skills to drive innovation, both product and process innovation, which were discussed later on in Unit 2. Innovation will help to drive new and better quality products onto markets. Another factor that improves human capital is education and training. A well-educated workforce will drive innovation because they are educated. They come up with new ideas, they come up with new methods, new ways of improving existing operations. And this simply means they might have a competitive advantage over their competitors. So another factor that influences international competitiveness is the quality of human capital. So if the quality of human capital is improving, it is expected that in such country, they're going to have a competitive advantage over their competitors. I think that point is clear there. Okay. The third one is exchange rates. Are you there? Another factor that could determine how competitive a country is internationally is through the exchange rate. And when we talk about exchange rate, we're simply talking about the price of a country's currency in relative to other countries' currency. So I'm going to read further. The exchange rate affects the price at which products are bought and sold internationally. Changes in the exchange rate will affect the price competitiveness of goods and services on international market. For example, a rise in the US exchange rate is likely to make US goods less price competitive abroad and imports more competitive in US markets. A fall in US exchange rate is likely to make US goods more price competitive abroad and imports into the US less competitive. So I'm going to talk about that anyway. So as we know, exchange rate is the value of a country's currency relative to other countries' currency. So let's assume that the exchange rate in Libya is appreciating, is increasing, or is rising in value. So if the exchange rate in Libya is rising in value, it makes importation into Libya to be
Easier.
to be price competitive.
Yeah.
While exportation out of Libya becomes less competitive. That is the point there. So a rise in the Libyan dinars will bring about more international competitiveness in terms of importation and less international competitiveness in terms of exportation. I think the point there is clear.
Yes.
Good. The second one is a fall in the Libyan dinars. So a fall in the Libyan dinars will make Libya to be more internationally competitive in terms of exportation and less international competitive when it comes to importation. It is less international competitive because the price of importation would have risen over time based on the fact that more Libyan dinars are needed to purchase few foreign goods. That is why it's going to be less internationally competitive. I think the point is clear there.
Yes.
Good. Then, furthermore, they said the extent to which there is a change in competitiveness depends in part on the price elasticity of demand for a good. The lower the price elasticity of demand, the less impact a change in price caused by a change in the exchange rate will have on quantity demanded. Also, the way in which firms respond to change in the exchange rate will affect competitiveness. So, before we go to how firms respond, let's talk about elasticity. So, yes, irrespective of the exchange rate. So, another factor that still goes with price is about the elasticity of demand for that product. So if the product is priced if the demand for the product is priced inelastic, it simply means irrespective of the exchange rate appreciating or depreciating, they will still buy. Foreign customers will still buy. And one of the reasons why foreign customers might continue to buy such product is probably because of the quality of the product or the scarcity of the product. Are you with me, please?
Yep.
Okay. So elasticity can also determine if a country can be internationally competitive or less internationally competitive when exchange rate is involved. And the last one here is how firms in that country respond. They said Okay. Also, the way in which firms respond to a change in the exchange rate will affect competitiveness. For example, if export firms respond by keeping foreign currencies prices the same, there will be no change in price competitiveness, although there could be long-run effect due to changes in profits and the impact this has on investment. So yeah, the exchange rate has changed. Okay, the exchange rate has changed, but it's also based on how firms in that market, in that country, respond towards that change. If they allow it to stay the way it is previously, they will still remain internationally competitive, but
Yeah.
it's going to affect them in the long run. So if the Libyan dinars has appreciated, let's say it has appreciated against the dollars. So okay, let's say it was $1 to dinars before now, but now it is $1 to maybe $3. That is appreciation, you know.
Mhm.
So if the foreign con- the foreign if the foreign the exporters feel, let's talk about appreciating here, or let me see. No, let's say the dollars appreciated against the dinars here. That will make the value of export to rise. If the right?
Mhm.
If the dollar appreciated against the dinars, it means importation becomes expensive, right? Okay. So let's assume the dollar appreciated against the dinars. If if the dollars appreciate against the dinars, it means more dinars are needed to get few dollars, right? So if more dinars are needed to get few dollars, so what will US firms do regarding this situation to keep customers of Libya to continue to buy? They might as well leave the dollar rate the way it was previously. So if they leave it the way it was previously, it simply means nothing changes. So they're still going to be able to, the Libyan customers will still be able to buy from US. But what happens to US firms in the long run? Their profit is going to reduce and it might affect their investment in the future. So that is the response here. So the response about keeping foreign currency price the same is going to affect, it's going to let you to be price competitive because your price become cheaper as it was before. But the point is your profit margin reduces and that might affect your investment because it's only when you make profit, you can think about investment.
Mhm.
Do you get the point there?
Mhm.
So that's another factor that could affect international competitiveness of a country. So the next one is wage and non-wage cost. Are you there?
Mhm.
For wage and non-wage cost, the cost of employing labor for a firm are the wages it pays, as well as non-wage cost paid by the employer. Both these will affect the average cost of labor per unit of output produced. For example, if US wage and non-wage costs, such as company pensions or taxes on employment of workers rise relative to its main trading partners, then the US will become less internationally competitive. Increases in wage costs are likely to lead to increase in prices. So a 10% rise in wages in the US is likely to lead to some rise in export prices. The extent of the rise will depend on factors such as increase in labor productivity and whether firms are prepared to change their profit margin. Wage and non-wage cost. The reward for labor is wages. So if wage is increasing in a country, the country will incur more cost. So because the country is incurring more costs, like the firms in such countries incurring more costs, it means they might have to pass on that high cost as high prices on products. And as a result of that, the value of their export would fall
Mhm.
based on the fact that export prices become expensive. On the other hand, if wage rate is cheaper in relative to other countries, then the country might be internationally competitive. So wage can also be a factor that determines if a country or firms in a country can be internationally competitive or not. And for non-wage factors, it could be, it depends on, this could be maybe labor productivity. And if labor productivity is increasing, irrespective of whatever you pay as wage, it simply means it's covering for it. Do you understand? So if wage rate is increasing at the same time labor productivity is increasing, then it means you might still be balanced. And as a result of that, you can still become internationally competitive. And also, a firm might also think about the profit margin. So if your labor productivity if the wage rate is increasing and you're like, okay, you still want to continue to be internationally competitive, you might leave the price at it was. But remember, when you do that, there's a cost for that. The cost is that your profit margin would fall. So that's what we talk about, non-wage cost here. You
Mhm.
get it?
Mhm.
So if wages are increasing, exporting firms have options. They increase the price of their export goods, which makes them to be less internationally competitive, or they ensure that labor productivity increases the rate at which labor wage is increasing. So if we are giving you more, you do more too. Do you get the point here? So if the cost of labor is increasing, if labor productivity is increasing, it could balance up with the high cost to become lower cost. Or firms might just, make it an opportunity cost by sacrificing the profit margin. So that would allow them to be internationally competitive. I think it's clear.
Yes.
Another factor that could determine international competitiveness is regulation. Please, I will be right back here. Right. Okay. So we'll go to regulations. And when we talk about regulations, we're simply talking about laws that guide laws from the government of a country. Increases in the regulations of industry tends to increase cost of production for firms. For example, UK firms tend to have lower costs than firms in France and Germany because regulation is lighter in the UK. Hence, less regulation is likely to increase international competitiveness. So when we talk about regulations, we're talking about laws pertaining to trading within the country. So based on what I just read now, they said UK has light regulations compared to countries like France and Germany, and that is why UK might be internationally competitive compared to these countries. Then, why is regulation? Why does regulation increases cost? It increases cost because of the compliance of regulations. So firms have to comply with what the law says. If not, they might be shut down. So if regulations are strict in countries, it affects the operations of such country and of firms in such country. And if their operation is affected, it simply means it's going to increase their cost of production. So if regulations are so strict, that means are so tight in a country, it affects the firms in that country and that increases their cost of production. And if their cost of production is increasing, it affects them because they have to pass on those high costs on to higher prices, which means foreign customers will find it difficult, expensive to purchase their products, and that makes them to be less internationally competitive. That is the case of the UK compared to France and Germany here. They said the UK regulations is light is lighter compared to France and Germany. And that might make it, that might make firms in the UK to be internationally competitive compared to firms in Germany and France. That is regulation, which is another factor that could influence international competitiveness. Like I was saying earlier on, most of the time, the rivalry is always between China and USA, right? So China wants to be internationally competitive with its exports, same as US. So one of the ways in which China might have to, you know, slug it out with America is through regulation. China might soften their laws, China might soften their regulations. America can as well do that. So any which ways, the point is a factor that could influence how internationally competitive a country is could be the government of that country. So if the government wants to encourage exportation, because if government encourages exportation, it appreciates the value of the country, it increases the GDP of the country, it improves the balance of payments of the country. So every country or every government of different country would want to do that. So, and if that is happening, if countries are able to, if governments of countries are able to, soften or deregulate, probably deregulate, it might allow them to be internationally competitive. That's the factor there. Another factor that could also influence how internationally competitive a country is, or firms in the country is the quality of infrastructure. And when it comes to infrastructure, we're talking about transportation, road network, electricity, communication, and let's read anyway. Quality of infrastructure. The quality of infrastructure in an economy will affect the cost of transporting goods and services. Poor infrastructure in roads, rail, and air will increase the time it takes to transport goods. And when it takes time, it takes money. And because it's taking money, it increases cost. This will increase transport costs and make it harder for firms to remain price competitive. Problems with electricity supply and transport, which disrupt production, will reduce labor productivity. Output per worker will fall. This means unit labor costs will rise, international competitiveness will reduce. So, countries with poor infrastructure are not likely to be developed. So, infrastructure is key because before we even talk about international competitiveness, countries without infrastructure would not attract foreign direct investment, would not attract multinationals. So infrastructure is very key, is key to the development of a nation. So look at what poor infrastructure will cause here. Poor infrastructure will cause a high cost of transportation, will cause lower labor productivity. Because if there's no electricity, how will workers be able to work? How would they be able to use equipment? Oh, they have to run through diesel. That incurs cost. It's even going to bring about pollution.
Yep.
Do you get it? So a country without infrastructure is not likely to be internationally competitive. It's not even likely to be developed. So that's why most of the countries, the first thing they try to work on is their infrastructure. Work on your infrastructure, then everything will come into place. So that's the point there. So when you look at Libya now, they are trying to work on their bridges, electricity. Why are they working on these things? The government is working on these things because if bridges are intact, if the road network is free, the movement of transport, the transportation of goods and services becomes faster. This might attract foreign direct investment into Libya. So infrastructure is key for the development of any nation. So if a country has better infrastructure, it is likely to be internationally competitive because the cost of transportation would fall, labor productivity would rise. And if the cost of transportation is falling, it means the cost of production is falling. If labor productivity is increasing, it means output is increasing. So if your cost of production is falling, your output is increasing. It means you'll be price competitive. And then when you are price competitive, it increases the value of your export and the volume of your export. I think the point there is clear.
Yep.
So that's another factor that could affect or that could influence how a country can be internationally competitive. The next one we have to talk about is non-price factors. Yeah, price is key. We know price is key, but sometimes there are other factors that
should be considered.
That have to be considered, that should be considered when it comes to how internationally competitive a country is. So I'm going to read further. Non-price factors. Prices and costs are only one factor determining demand and supply. Non-price factors other than price, which influence the consumer's demand for a product. This includes design, branding, and quality. Firms which produce better quality products than their international rivals will have a competitive advantage. In advanced economies, the manufacturing sector in recent years has only survived because it has avoided price competition with cheap labor countries and produced unique, better quality products. Technology and innovation are often important because a country can then produce technologically advanced products that other countries do not make. When it comes to international competitiveness, another factor that is very important is a non-price factor. And when we talk about non-price factors, we're talking about factors that do not have anything to do with price. Yeah, competitiveness comes with price, yes, but sometimes customers will not even look at the price. They look at other factors outside price, like the quality of the product, the brand of the product,
Mm.
and the kind of design the product has, because these things make the product to be unique. So there's uniqueness, there's the USP, the unique selling point of foreign firms, the unique selling point of exporters. So if exporters are able to, to compete with non-price factors, they might have a competitive advantage over those that are still thinking about competing with price. So non-pricing factors like advancement in technology bring about innovation. So this means an exporter or an exporting firm will be able to produce goods better than those of its competitors.
Mm.
So non-pricing factors like branding, like the quality, like the design, or even advertisement are things that could make a country to be internationally competitive in the global market. So not only price. Any question about that?
Mm.
So these are all the factors that could influence international competitiveness when it comes to global market. We
Mm.
talked about productivity, we talked about relative export prices, we talked about exchange rate, we talked about what again? Relative unit labor cost, we talked about human capital, the quality of human capital. We've talked about the quality of infrastructure. We've talked about what again? We talked about wage and non-wage cost, and the last one we talked about now,
Regulations and
regulations and non-price factors.
infrastructure, we said it.
Yeah, poor infrastructure. Yeah, quality of infrastructure. So all these things are factors that could influence how competitive a country could be, or an economy could be, or a firm could be in the global market.
Mm.
So the next lesson is going to be on measures to increase international competitiveness. Measures to increase international competitiveness. So our next lesson now is about measures to increase international competitiveness. Yeah, what brings about this? A country might not be internationally competitive, but that does not end it. If a country is not internationally competitive, a country can work on that and it could work for it. So when you're not good at something, the only thing you need to do is to work on it and get better.
Mm.
So how will a country become internationally competitive? That's the point we're making here. So you want to be able to produce the same way as your competitors. You want to be able to compete in the global market. So what are those things a country can do? Or what are those things an exporting firm can do to become internationally competitive? We're going to start, please. Measures to increase international competitiveness. The first one is policies to improve education and training. Education and training, education and training improves the skills of the workforce. It improves human capital. And remember, one of the factors that that can influence how competitive a country could be in the global market is human capital.
Mm.
So if human capital is one of the factors that could influence how competitive a country could be, so it simply means policies should come in place. Policies should come to improve human capital.
Mm.
So policies are needed to improve human capital. And what are those policies? Those policies will be on education and training. So let's read further. Policies to improve education and training. The quality of education and training provided by a government will be limited by how much it can spend. Now, there's a constraint. We call it constraint. So education and training is expensive, yes or no?
Yep.
So if a country wants to improve its human capital, it means it needs to invest more on education and training. So because the more investment, the more money you spend on education, the quality it gives back to you in return. So That's why they said the quality of education and training provided by government will be limited by how much it can spend. So the constraint is about how much is available in government budgets, how much is being apportioned from the government budget on education. That is the point they're making here. Do you get it?
Yeah.
So, spending on education and training per capita will clearly be a main factor which influences its quality. However, the government can maximize the returns with other policies. Curriculum needs to change over time to meet new needs. For example, advances in technology require workers with new skills. Teachers need to be trained to meet these needs in the classroom too. I will be right back now. Yeah. So they said curriculums need to change over time to meet needs. For example, advances in technology require workers with new skills. Teachers need to be trained to meet these needs in the classroom too. So it simply means an economy would only improve in terms of its human capital if teachers in the classroom are able to, to pass on knowledge, advanced knowledge, new knowledge to work to students who are going to likely become workers or who are likely to go into the labor market to seek for employment. So the quality of education starts from the classroom. And that's why most of the time, the classroom is key.
Yeah.
So if the classroom is poor, the quality of education will be poor. So if the classroom of countries, if the classroom in countries are poor, it simply means the labor market in such country will be poor, which affects productivity and the quality of human capital. So it is what you have, you give. You can't give what you don't have. So it's important an economy focuses more on education, because if you can focus more on education, it impacts on the human capital, which can also affect how competitive the country could be. So the key teachers are important still here.
Yeah.
So I'm going to read further anyway. There might be opportunities to learn a wider range of skills if more vocational courses which relates closely to a specific occupation are offered as well as traditional subjects. Digital learning might also provide a way for learning outcomes to improve on limited budgets. Economies also experience structural unemployment. So the government needs to ensure that there are training opportunities for individuals throughout their lives. Firms might be given tax incentives or subsidies to extend the training schemes they can provide. It is also important that all groups, regardless of income, can have access to good quality education and training. How government support those on low incomes will also therefore affect the skills of the population as a whole. Now, the importance of education and training cannot be overemphasized. It is important, it is key. So it simply means government for any country or for any economy that is thinking about developing to become a developed economy, it has to really spend most of its budget on education and training. And if it's difficult to get that done, government can come up with tax incentives, subsidies to encourage firms, countries, encourage firms, schools, to allow access for education. But you get the point here.
Yeah.
So, literally, what we're talking about, the policies to improve education and training is government must ensure that it comes up with policies that allow a country to have access to quality education. Because quality education would improve the human capital. And if human capital is improved, it brings about increased competitiveness in the global market. I think education and training is clear. Good. Go to investment incentives. Another factor or another measure that could improve international competitiveness is investment incentives. And when we talk about investment, we already know what investment is. Spending on capital goods, that is investment. Then what about incentives? Ensuring that it becomes, a reason for investment, influencing investment. So investing in more advanced technology should increase both capital and labor productivity for a business. This increases international competitiveness as unit labor cost falls. Investment in research and development, R&D, also helps competitiveness. R&D influences the uniqueness of a product. The extent to which firms engage in research and development may influence their long-term international competitiveness. Before we go further, the quality of education, we've talked about it. The quality of education and training would measures how the quality of human capital is. And if human capital is improving, the country will be internationally competitive. Yeah, before I go into investment and incentive, I was speaking with someone, a colleague in the school last week. We were talking about education in Libya. The university education is free, right?
Yes.
So because the Libyan education, the tertiary education is free in Libya, it simply means everyone have access. Everyone has access to education.
You know, like 70% of workers in the marketplace in Libya have a bachelor's degree.
They have it. Do you know why? Because education is
It's accessible.
accessible. And because education is accessible, so you telling me that, so what really brought us to that situation was like, we're talking about poverty.
Mm.
A country, an economy that, that have access to education should not talk about poverty.
Mm.
So which simply means for the fact that you have access to education, because education is free, it allows you to learn, to relearn, to unlearn. So if a Libyan citizen is talking about poverty, it simply means that individual is not trying hard to, to get himself or herself engaged because there's access to education. Education is free.
Mm.
So in as much as education is free, like what they're just saying here, in as much as education is free in Libya, it simply means the quality of education is intact. So which simply means you have skills and knowledge to seek for employment. You have skills and knowledge to be an entrepreneur.
Mm.
So this, and when you look at it, it's reflecting the Libyan economy. And that's why Libya is one of the countries that have the greatest GDP per capita in Africa. Because yes, Libya has one of the greatest GDP per capita. And it is basically because of access to education. So that it means more than 50% of Libyans are educated.
Mhm.
So if they are educated, it simply means the economy would grow. Do you understand? So that was what we were talking about. Then when you told me that, oh, the university education is free in Libya, it's like, oh, a lot of African countries are still wallowing in abject poverty because they don't have access to education.
Mm.
Yeah, you might be able to do that of the secondary education, but tertiary education is key. So if African countries start thinking about accessibility to tertiary education, it will improve the economy know-how. It will improve human capital. People will become educated and start understanding how to get things done without even, they will start thinking about being self-employed.
Mm.
But without education, it becomes difficult. So that's about education anyway. We're done with education. And now we go to investment incentives. Investment is about spending on capital goods. And when you spend on capital goods, it simply means you are spending on research and development. You are trying to you are trying to be innovative. Innovation will bring about new ideas, new products, new services. And whenever you come up with new product, new service, this is different from what customers used to see.
Mm.
So because in the eyes of customers, all products that are similar are the same. So if you are able to come up with a product that is differentiated through innovative ideas, that might give you international competitiveness. Oh, Libya is not internationally competitive. Okay, what can Libya do? Libya would improve on its oil. Oh, before now, Libya only export crude oil. Oh, now Libya can export diesel. Libya can export gasoline. Libya can export aviation kerosene. Libya can export kerosene itself. So that means Libya is innovating.
Mm.
So this will allow Libya to be internationally competitive, not only crude oil. Because if Libya only exports crude oil, it simply means Libya would only have customers that need crude oil. But with Libya trying to, be innovative, spreading the crude oil into different resources,
Mm.
that is innovation. That means Libya customers, foreign customers would expand.
Yeah.
And that would allow Libya, okay.
GDP per capita.
Look, like what I just said now, the GDP per capita of Libya is second in Africa. Just confirming what is it there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Just confirming what I just said now.
11,600.
Yeah, the Libyan GDP per capita is increasing, and it is mostly honored to the accessibility of education. Without education, this will not happen. So Libya is one of the countries that have the greatest GDP in terms of GDP per capita because its education system is working and is working effectively. If people are able to have access to tertiary education, that would really improve the human capital and it will improve the economy as a whole. Because having access to education makes you even employable.
Mm.
So when you don't have education, how can you get employed? You are unemployed. And that's why they talked about structural unemployment here. A lot of people are not employed, not because there's unemployment, because they are not, they are not employable. So that was what I was telling. I told the guy, I told the colleague, I said, look, if people say they don't have jobs in Libya, it's
Mm.
because they don't have access, they choose not to have a job. Because when you have university education, it simply means you are employable, but you choose not to go to school. So that is on you, not on government. The government has provided you with a tool that would allow you to explore, but you choose not to explore by not going for it, by not going to educate, by not getting education. So that is about that. So if the Libyan PGP per capita is increasing or is at the highest, it's at the highest because Libya has access to education.
Mm.
So for investment and incentives anyway, so a government of a country can promote investment by keeping taxes on profit low.
Mm.
So investment is a factor that is needed that could also help a country to be internationally competitive. And for that to happen, government have to encourage firms by allowing them to pay low tax. Low taxation becomes an incentive for investment. So if entrepreneurs understand that the return on their investment would rise because of low taxes, they would be encouraged to invest. Do you get the point here?
Mhm.
So government have to come up with cutting taxes to encourage investment. So this means firms have more sources of finance available for investment. The government might also use interventionist supply side policies to promote investment, such as grants available for investment, such as R&D and tax relief on investment spending. So another way in which government can also encourage investment is through interventionist supply side policies, giving grants to encourage investment, tax relief, or probably subsidies on firms that are, engaging in research and development. If government can do this, the country will have more investment, and that might also allow the country to be internationally competitive. That's the second way in which countries can be more internationally competitive. And the third one I'm going to talk about here is privatization and deregulation. Are you there?
Mm.
Privatization is the sale of government organizations to the private sector. Deregulation is the process of removing